All right, 1 2 1 2, testing it real quick. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get this show started today. We are excited to partner with the League of Women Voters of Lawrence, Douglas County, and Humanities, Kansas to bring you this four-part Civic Engagement 101 series. Our goal is to bring you unbiased and nonpartisan information on the issues on this November's ballot and to help you understand your right as voters. This session is being streamed over Zoom and will be recorded and available on the library's YouTube channel. The first session in this series is now available on our YouTube channel. It covers the constitutional amendments on the November ballot, as well as the issue of the retention of judges. Our next session will be October 11th and will feature historian Virgil Dean presenting We the People of Kansas, the story of Kansas's founding documents, 1820 to 2020. The final session will be October 25th and will feature Hans Zacharias presenting city and county governments in Kansas. What do they do and how are they financed? And tonight, I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Loud Light, a state-based nonprofit focused on increasing and encouraging youth civic participation in Kansas, especially among our underrepresented populations. This organization has done amazing grassroots work to build youth power and get young people ready to vote in our local elections. And today they will be discussing the importance of voting in local elections, make sure you're up to date on your voting rights in Kansas, and then just cover some differences about the voting process this fall so you can leave here ready and prepared to vote. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce to you Anita Austin.
Hello. Thank you guys. Really glad to be here. I am Anita Austin. I am the program director at Loud Light. I'm only about 5'3", so the podium's a little high for me. It's really great to see you guys here tonight. I'm glad you came. I'm just gonna hop right in with this Know Your Voting Rights presentation. And the first page is a little bit more about me. Just to introduce myself, I guess give myself some credibility. I've been doing civic engagement work for the past 4 years, working as the program director at Loud Light. Before that, I worked for the State House. I was an assistant in the House of Representatives, and I always held jobs on the government or the state side of things, working for the city or the state. And it was coming to work at Loud Light was my first job in advocacy, and I'm never going back. I've been able to do some really great things, and it's a really inspiring work. And so I'm glad I can be here today to talk to you guys. I was one of those people who kind of grew up thinking things are the way they are, and you do your best to work within those systems. And it wasn't until I went to college that I was like, actually, it's this way because people aren't engaged. Took US Gov because I had to, because it was one of those required classes. And it was after that that I declared my major in political science. And so I've been really passionate about this type of work for a long time now. This is what today's presentation is really about, how we don't have representation. There's a lot of demographics that are marginalized, that are dangerously underrepresented, both in voter turnout and in elected office. Like, we often wonder why our electorate looks so different or acts so different than the actual people they represent. And it's because we didn't elect those people. Voter turnout in the United States is low. Sometimes we have elections with 50 or 60% of the population voting, and then they're usually pretty close on the candidates that they are voting for, meaning that our officials that wind up in office are a really small fraction of the people who live in those communities, in those states, in those towns. It's representing an extremely small fraction of them. And when that happens, it means fewer needs met. So we hire and fire our government leaders. I don't think that people really internalize this concept as much as they should. It's kind of like if you went to work every day and your boss is not there, you're a little bit lazier that day because he's not there and no one's going to check. We hired our elected officials, and then if we just don't show up every day that they're at work, they tend to eventually just kind of do what they want, and they get away with it because no one's watching. Um, and so by not showing up, we also create this cycle. Because we don't speak up, they have no reason to address the issues that we most want heard. You often see policies going towards big money, going towards a certain class or groups of people, but it's also those same people who really show up as part of the process. who are really engaged, really involved, and know exactly what's going on. So the more that turnout lowers and plummets, it's just giving large donations, major corporations more power in deciding legislation, deciding what happens with our future. Which I think this is something we all know, right? We've all heard. But if you really, really think about the implications of it, it makes me want to hold people accountable. So this is what what you see in green is like beautiful democracy. We have the people who are going to the elections and hiring our government, who then makes laws that represent us, that make us happy and supported in our communities. But what happens when we don't show up is what is in the red, which is where we have these major campaign contributions coming from really large corporations, and then those are influencing our laws and government, and creating a lot of the apathy that we experience of feeling like we don't have a voice or what we do doesn't matter, or that my vote doesn't count, which is one of the biggest lies ever told. And so really we're striving to like disrupt the red and achieve the green, right? So there are a lot of big things on the ballot this year. And this is it's not our big election, right? It's not our presidential election. It's not the one that people tend to pay attention to. It's one of our smaller midterm elections, but there are very, very important things on the ballot. Um, the governor's race, which is one of the top three governor's races in the nation, being watched right now because of the implications. We also have a legislature right now that is majority one party, and our governor being from a different political party creates a system of like checks and balances and like that good government we want to see where we're all and so if that changes, then we could have an overwhelming majority and a lot less say from different groups. And so that's a really important thing to pay attention to. Also, our Secretary of State's race has major implications on how elections are run. And we've seen a lot of uptick in anti-voter law. We've seen a lot of stuff come out of the last legislative session regarding voting and restrictions on it and on mail-in ballots and on drop boxes and all that type of legislation that we know today as common day voter suppression. We are seeing a lot of that in Kansas. And our Secretary of State is big on deciding how elections are run. And so paying attention to that race is really important. Also, Senate District 3, big deal, because if you guys, which I'm assume you are, the folks that pay attention, we redistrict. We had a whole redistricting where they cut up Senate District 3, where they gerrymandered the hell out of Senate District 3. And now it's got a lot of the nation watching us to see what happens. And it's actually marked us one of the top races in the country. Also, these races all have a big possibility of being decided by young voters. Young voters make up a huge portion of the population in Kansas, actually so much so that they can decide these major races with their votes. And so knowing that we have power and knowing that the values we want to see reflected in government are achievable if we just show up. So this is a lot, and there's also more stuff that some of us were talking about right before this started. We've got amendments on more amendments because we just had some on our primary, but we've got more amendments on this next ballot in November. We also have questions about judge retention. There's a lot of key local races that may be happening in different places around town, around the state that are different depending on where you live. But there's a whole lot going on, which is why there's these little guys that are dizzy and stressed in the corner, because this is actually a lot for people to know. And we were making comments earlier that even for those of us who are heavily involved in this work, we have to take time to decipher and figure out exactly what's going on so that we can provide clear information to the public. And all of those things that make government less transparent, that make it a little bit harder to figure out, are also part of common day voter suppression, and wording things in extremely lingo-filled ways so that it's hard for people to know exactly what they're voting on. It's hard for them to understand exactly what folks are talking about. We are trying to break down those barriers because that is definitely going on. and we want to provide clear information. So it can be a lot, but we want to be a resource. So we work to make voting more accessible so that you know what's going on, so that you're more easily able to exercise your rights. We're going to be hosting more educational events, just like this one, where we talk more in depth about the amendments, about judge retention. So be on the lookout for those things. We'll also be doing in the partnership with the league and some other orgs around Kansas. But Kansans have a right to have their voices heard and to see their values reflected in government. And so that's what today is about. Um, so I'm going to get into our agenda for the presentation, which is registration, how you can register, how to vote, whether you're going to vote by mail, early voting in person, or if you're going to vote in person on election day. And we're also going to go through some other issues that people sometimes have with voting and make sure you're clear on anything when you go to the polls and that you feel very prepared for today. Does all this sound good? Yes. All right. So the first thing we'll talk about is who can vote in Kansas. You must meet all of these qualifications. So you have to be a United States citizen. You must be a resident of the state of Kansas, and you have to be at least 18 years of age. There is an exception at the bottom there. 17-year-olds can register to vote if they're going to be 18 before election day, which is cool because we work at high schools. We have 17-year-olds in our lives, and it's a good thing to let them know that they can go ahead and register now. I want to give some caveats to these things. You know, being a United States citizen, we always think is one of the most key things to voting. But I've run across a lot of international students. I've run across people who are undocumented, who feel excluded from the process because they're unable to vote. And I tell them that just because you can't vote does not mean you can't be an engaged person in your community. I like to use the example of a nurse. If you have a nurse in your family and you get sick, you're going to call your cousin who's a nurse probably before you go to the doctor. And voting can be like that too. If you know someone who is super engaged, like myself, if you happen to know Anita, you could ask me, when's the last day I can change my voter registration? When's the last day I can request an advance ballot? And I'll tell you, because my goal is to be like the nurse in the family, right? The one who knows the stuff so that I can share it with everybody else, because not everybody can be an expert all the time. And so it's good, especially for those of you in this room or those of you who may be watching this live stream, that even if you're not a citizen, you can be the nurse in the family. You can be the one who knows the stuff and who helps other people get engaged. As for a caveat on the second line, being a resident of the state of Kansas, there's actually no residency requirements to register to vote. So you could move here yesterday and register to vote here today. And I think that's really good to know too, because I work with a lot of young adults who are in college and they may be staying in their dorms and they think that I don't really live here. I'm just living here while I'm in school. And I'm like, no, you really live here and you should register to vote here. And so all of these things are very important to remember. Oh, and this is what I was just mentioning, voting for out-of-state people. So you can still vote in Kansas as long as you did not vote in your home state. And as long as you are registered here and you register by the deadline. You do have to have a photo ID, but your student ID will count if you're attending an accredited university. And so also, I want to add that you can be registered in more than one place. Like if you live in Missouri and you go to school in Kansas, you could technically be registered in both of those places, and that's not illegal. But if you were to vote in more than one place, that's absolutely illegal, and you should not do that. So make sure that when you go to cast your ballot, it is in one place, and it's the place you currently live. So now we'll get into registering and how you register to vote. So in Kansas, you can use a federal form or a state form. I will say at Loud Light, we like the federal form because it's more simplistic. It requires less information. It's more generalized. It's just easy, more user-friendly for people. So we do like the federal form, even though you can use both of them. They do have different ID requirements, and I think that that throws people off. And so again, I like to lean towards the federal form. If you go to ksvotes.org, it is a digital copy of the federal form, so that's what we use there. And regardless of what you use, it's really important that you re-register each time you move. If you change your name or if you want to change your party affiliation. I've known lots of people, and maybe you have too, that like move down the street, that move around the corner, that move somewhere in their same neighborhood because they didn't want their kids to switch schools. They still need to re-register to vote because you have no idea where the dividing line for your county elected officials are, or for your city councilmen, or for some of those smaller areas. Make sure that no matter how far or not far you move, that you're re-registering to vote. So the registration deadline for the general elections, October 18th. I think that's all, that's that slide. That's remember that the deadline's October 18th. Make sure you tell your friends. So here's some different ways to vote in Kansas, and we do always push folks to have a voting plan because it's easy to say I'm going to vote, but saying like, oh, actually, I'm going to take my lunch hour on Tuesday and go down to my polling place because I know where it is, that's a different thing. So really thinking about how you're going to vote when you plan to vote. And here are the different ways. You can vote by mail, early in person, or you can go in person on election day. And so I'm going to go in a little bit more into these different methods. So applying to vote by mail, which is also, some people call it a mail-in ballot, some people call it an advanced ballot. If you work in the field all the time, we just call it an AB because we start using abbreviations because we talk about this stuff a lot. So you can request an AB before election day. And in Kansas, you don't have to have some special reason to get one. In some states, you have to prove that you're disabled or that you need to vote by mail for some reason. But in Kansas, anyone can vote by mail if you just request an advanced ballot. And you can do that at ksvotes.org. You can also do that at the Secretary of State's website. And there also are some counties, I added this in, who are just mailing applications to all active registered voters. So I've talked to some people who are really concerned, where they're like, I've got an advance ballot in the mail and I did not request one, and what is going on? And, we're all very, I think, a time where there's a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? People are acting like there's stuff wrong with our elections, and there's really not. In Kansas, especially, we have some of the safest, most secure elections with multiple steps of security to make sure that your vote is being counted safely. And so we don't want to feed into that narrative. Mail-in ballots are very, very safe. And if you receive one in the mail, it could just be because they're mailing one to all active voters in your county. So here's some more additional advanced ballot information. You must complete an application to vote by mail ballot. You do have to take that process to go and complete the application. And you must submit a new one each year, each time you want to use it. So it's not just going to come to you automatically. You'll have to get in there and do that every election cycle that you want to use an AB. You can receive your ballot anywhere you're staying at that can receive mail. So even if the address on your voter registration is one place, if you would like your mail-in ballot sent somewhere else, mail-in ballots actually started during the Civil War, fun history fact, and contributed to Lincoln winning his election. And it was because American soldiers were at war and couldn't vote during the election time. And so it was when they first started. And so obviously a lot of people are requesting them because they're not at home, hence the purpose. So just know that you can get that sent anywhere. If you're on vacation in Florida during the election, get it sent there, send it back. Your application for an advanced ballot by mail must be received in your county election office no later than 7 days before the date of the election. So I think that for this year, it's November the 1st that you have to request your AB by if you want to get one in time for the election. Don't wait till then. If you're going to vote by mail, go ahead and do that now. I talked to one of my coworkers the other day who gave me a pro tip about voting by mail, that it is really hard to know everything on your ballot. And so a lot of us will do a lot of research. We'll attend events like this so that we can feel prepared when we go vote. If you request an advanced ballot, you can get it, look at it, and study. It's like an open book test. You can you can look at your ballot. You can be like, what does this mean? I don't know. I'll find out. I have all day. I have the next 2 days, as long as I mail it back before the deadline, right? And so she was saying that she gets hers and actually spends several days filling it out, that she will take a day and look through each one. And I thought that was really awesome because it is a lot to take in. And so that's a nice way to also use your AB. You can receive your ballot up to 20 days before the election and no later than 5 days, so you can already request them right now. So here's just some information on completing your advanced ballot application. You want to make sure it's all the way complete. They are not playing at the election office. If anything is wrong, it's not gonna go through. So you must provide your identification information. You have to provide your Kansas driver's license number or your non-driver ID number, and a copy of it acceptable from a photo ID. You have to sign the application. And then you also have to mail it in or return it to an approved Dropbox location. So here's some stuff about criminal history and voting. This comes up for me every single election cycle. I talk to somebody who's like, I can't vote. I can't vote. And I'll be like, but why though? Because a lot of people have a criminal history and they've been told if they were ever convicted of a crime that their rights to vote have been permanently removed. And in some states, that's true. Not in Kansas. I love these not in Kansas examples because usually in Kansas we're messing things up. And usually in Kansas, we can be behind the other states that have done more progressive measures. So I'm really happy that in Kansas, you can vote after you've had a felony conviction. You just have to make sure that you have completed your sentence in full and that you're completely off papers, which means that you've done any probation, you've done any parole, you've paid any fines, you are 100% done. You can't have a balance left at all. But when it's all taken care of, your rights are restored and you just need to register to vote again. And that is really amazing. Also, if you are pretrial detainees, you can vote because there's not been a conviction. And so, you know, anyone unfortunate enough that they are in jail right in that moment, but they haven't been charged yet, tell them to vote. Here's some information about limited English proficiency because voters with limited English proficiency can also select an assistant to help accompany them in the voting booth. So they're required to fill out like an affidavit of assistance. And then there's some counties that are listed here that have very high Hispanic populations, and so they are required to provide voting materials in English and in Spanish. Which is important to know. Your vote is your voice, yeah. Voting should be accessible for everybody, and we don't want language to be a barrier to that. So make sure that folks you know are aware of this. So, and then this gets into some more accessibility. So polling places are supposed to be ADA accessible. They're supposed to have ramps, handrails, voting booths at wheelchair heights, doorways wide enough for wheelchairs. When I say supposed to be, it's because some of them aren't, or some of them say they are, but it's actually not that accessible. Curbside voting option is required at all polling locations. I find this to be something not a lot of people know about, that you can call into your polling location and they will come out to your car and help you to vote. They'll send an election official out there that will help you to vote from your car. This is also an option for people who have COVID, because this came up in the past couple years with COVID being a thing, that what happens if I have COVID and I'm quarantined during the election? How do I vote? And you can do curbside voting so that you're not going in to the location. And so keep that in mind as well. You can also have assistance from somebody that you choose. So somebody that you choose can accompany you into the voting booth. And that person will just have to fill out an affidavit of assistance. Another caveat to going into the voting booth that I like to say is that there's not a lot of rules in that. You can pull out your phone, you can look something up, you can take as long as you need. Make sure you don't feel any pressure whatsoever when you're casting your vote or feel like you're doing anything wrong by taking a second to look something up. And then this one here is about election day help. So if you have a problem with a voter list, you can ask a poll worker for help. Problem with a polling place, ask a poll worker for help. But if you have problems with a poll worker, if a machine's broken, line's crazy long, if something you notice is wrong, call 1-866-RVOTE. This is the election protection hotline. And this is where we report any issues that come up during election day or at the polls, just to make sure, because they will investigate and make sure things are run properly. Oh my gosh. This I have a habit of going through presentations faster than I intended to, but that's okay because we'll have time for questions. Let me know if there's anything that you guys immediately want to know based on the things I've said. Any questions? Yes. Here, let me come to you so that I can hand you the mic.
So if somebody needs the curbside option in order to vote, where do they call to request? How do you do that? So if it's a church, just you would call the church and hope that the church secretary? That's probably what I would recommend.
Multiple options, but either would work.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I have a question with your advocacy. Do you advocate students vote in their home or at their student location, or do you even address that at all?
So yes, we definitely do advocate that students vote from their school address. And the argument there is you're going to the school, you're paying tuition that's decided by policy, you're driving down roads that are controlled by your city government, but you're living, breathing, experiencing, paying taxes in this community. And so you should absolutely be registered to vote here.
Because you brought this up, and that was the fact that you talked about how students, how young people can change an entire election. So if most of the young students in, let's say, a rural county are gone to college in other areas, then you're taking the entire young population out of that college at the vote, unless you encourage them to vote at home.
I can see the argument made there, but I would counter that with there are colleges in rural communities like Fort Hayes, like Liberal College, like Garden City. And so there very much are like young populations in those areas still. Any other questions?
What are the rules about electioneering at a polling place? How far away do they have to be from the entrance to the polling place?
So, and maybe some of the ladies from the league can help me with this one, but I think it's 100 feet. 250 feet, thank you, ladies. So, and churches and stuff can have signs and stuff up, but if they are a polling location, they cannot have any of that material up on the day of the election or on the day that site is being used as a polling location. And so that's been an issue in the past too, where we've seen people didn't move things into, didn't follow that protocol. Did you have one?
In Douglas County, Jamie Shue's electioneering information on his website includes bumper stickers. So if you have a bumper sticker on your car and you drive that to a polling location, you have to park more than 250 feet away from it, walk in.
Like a catch, yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of little details to
But
think.
it does specifically address that on its website. I did have another question. Can you talk a little bit about signatures on mail-in ballots and how important it is to match up signatures?
Yes, the mail-in, your signature on your mail-in ballot is extremely important because it's one of the security measures that they are going to match it against your signature from your driver's license. And they will throw it out if it's off, and which is interesting because we all as humans have slight variances in our signature every time we sign it. But we tend to follow certain patterns with big letters, with hand movements. And so they absolutely will match your signature, and it's important that you're signing it the same way you signed your ID. Yes.
Election, I wanted to make sure that my vote was counted. So what website do you go to that says, hey, your vote was counted?
So the individual county websites will sometimes have, and this isn't true of every single county because there's multiple counties in Kansas, all of different sizes, but some county websites will show you, especially with your mail-in ballot, that it was sent, that it was received, that it went through, and you can actually see the steps along the way. So I would check your county website for that, like, confirmation of your vote. Yes, yes, it feels good, don't it? Like, let me double check. I want to see it. Yes, another question.
So is advance voting and mail-in ballot the same thing?
Yes.
So you have to request it?
You do have to re-request it each year. Each election cycle, yes. Which there's an election every year, guys. Uh, Sometimes two, because the primary. But yes, and the AB and the mail-in ballot are interchangeable terms, so those things get used the same way. And we had you right here.
I was a poll worker on August the 2nd, and I had to check in with the poll judge, and I had to have certification from Jamie Shue that I had the right to be there. But there was somebody else at the polling site before I came in, and nobody knew why he was there. So who has the right to be in a poll site observing on an election day?
So there is an election protection program run by the ACLU in partnership with Loud Light, where we have poll observers that are volunteers there to observe what's happening and kind of call 1-866-RVOTE or report any problems they may see. Those poll workers aren't supposed to be in the polling location, though. They are supposed to be stationed somewhere outside. So to answer your question about who should be in there, I'm not sure. That might have been a 1-866-RVOTE type of thing, because there are only certain people who are supposed to be in there on that day. Yes, another question.
I'm also a poll worker and going through the training, and one of the questions came up with Jamie Shue was who can be in there in the polling place. And Jamie Shue said that anybody who is an election observer, they have to be associated with a candidate or a party, and they have to apply through him for their credentials to be in that polling place. And so they fill out a form, they get a badge, that badge should be on them. And when they go to the polling place and they are signed in to do that.
Because we have a lot of, what's the word? Vigilante. But you know, when people want to do their own thing, and I feel like every year at the polls, there's some crazy folks trying to make sure things are run right, but they're not supposed to be there. Yes, yes. Yeah.
In response to the previous question, it was, how do you know if you voted? How do you know if your vote counted? I do find it a little concerning, and I wish there was a better way, but for all those people who fill out a provisional ballot, they are marked as having voted, even if their vote is not counted. And I wish that there was some indication that their vote wasn't counted on, if you go to that myvoteinfo.voteks.org, which is the Secretary of State's site, where you can find all of your voting information, your polling place, your address, how you're registered, all your districts, and your voting history. And so if it says you voted and you knew you had to vote provisionally one year, again,
I have a caveat about provisional ballot data. So provisional ballots are all supposed to be followed up on later, right? The reason you cast a provisional is because maybe you forgot your ID or maybe you went to the wrong place, but for whatever reason, they had you cast a provisional ballot. And then later, that issue is supposed to be sorted out so that that ballot can be counted. And Loud Light had requested provisional ballot data because we wanted to track down those people and make sure that their votes counted. And some of the counties refused to give us that data, so we sued them for because it's public information and we want to know, like, why are you not, we want to make sure that these votes are being counted. We want to follow up on this data. And so we now have access to that information, and Loud Light runs a provisional ballot cure program to make sure that those provisional ballots are being counted.
So Douglas County has Ballot Scout that you also can go to see the progress of your ballot. Yeah, it's called Ballot Scout.
And I appreciate additional information. I always say no one's the expert on everything. So anyone who wants to pipe in with more things that they may know that are helpful, please do. Yes.
So I thought it was interesting in your presentation, you mentioned that other states have like requirements around requesting a mail-in ballot. Do you, and you might not know the answer to this, but do you see like the state of Kansas pursuing any changes to that requirement? Like maybe mandating that you have a physical disability or, you're sick with some sort of virus, like basically imposing a requirement on being able to request a mail-in.
So luckily, we haven't seen any legislation like that yet. Don't give them any ideals. My boss will sometimes say, don't question bad things because it's giving them an ideal to do it. But no, right now, there hasn't been any inclinations that they will change the guidelines on advanced ballot. Yes.
But I was told when I requested a mail-in ballot that I had to have a reason. And the first reason didn't count, I had to come up with a second one. So,
Does anyone have feedback for this one? Yeah, I haven't encountered that either before. And it could be there is an application for a permanent mail-in ballot, which would be so that you don't have to re-request. And people who have a permanent disability or something like that might want to fill out that one instead. And I wonder if that would make sense. Any other questions? We have lots of folks that either work with advocacy orgs or have worked at the polls, and you guys are all amazing individuals. Yes. Clap for yourselves, honestly, because not enough people are clapping for you. Okay, I feel like we're going to wrap up early today, but as long as you've got information delivered and questions answered, then we've had our mission accomplished. So thank you guys so much for having me here. Appreciate the chance to share information with you. And I don't know if I hand it over to you, Mark, or if we just say a polite goodbye. All right.
So, just in case any of you aren't aware, on our library website, we do have a pretty neat elections and voting pages. You might want to just give it a look, but it's going to have recordings for every session in this series. So, Anita, your presentation will go up on there. Amy Castle's session about the November amendments on the ballot is already up there. And then it just has good information about where to find information on candidates, important dates coming up, what have you. But yeah, that's it for tonight. So thank you all. Yeah.